You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 288 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's very exciting here with the red hot 9-8 Cubs over the last 17 days.
I do want to take a moment to thank you for filling in, bringing all of the engineering and production to the podcast last week while I was battling the airlines and my unavailability to record. So fine job last week, you and Jared Willis, top-notch podcast. I enjoyed being a consumer of this podcast. That was extremely fun, so got to listen to that episode.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. I mean, quite literally, it was a miracle. I think if I could get one more miracle, I could apply for sainthood. So if I got my first one, my first notch there, it took a while, but I'll be looking for that second one.
In 9 years, I've missed 2 episodes, and that was the second one I've missed in the 9 years we've been doing this podcast.
And the last person became a professional scout, so
that's right.
Good news for Jared's future.
And we've got another guest we'll bring on here in just a minute, but I did want to confirm, Pat, from the view outside your balcony, is Wrigley Field looking as underwhelming as the Red Sox player thought that it looks? And how is it looking tonight?
It's as majestic as ever. The most beautiful, famous, landmark baseball stadium in all of America and really all of the world. So all's well here.
Excellent.
I know not every 25-year-old pitcher who's only pitched on the road. I believe in Cleveland was his other road start. So, his point of comparisons were limited.
Well, we've got someone on to help us break down the week that was, all the news, some fun with some speculation as well. You know him from his work at Cubs Insider. Please welcome back longtime friend of the podcast, Evan Altman. Thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Yeah, I'm happy you guys actually had me on at a time when they're playing relatively well, right? Because I think within a month here we may not see another 9-8 stretch over quite some time.
Yeah, it's you and Jared talked about it last week, Pat, and now we're going to talk about it now. This team, Evan, has been watchable and entertaining, and some of these games have been pretty darn competitive. So it's quite a change of pace from a lot of that stretch in May and June.
Yeah, as long as they're not playing in extra innings, I think that's really the it's been so after they've had 2 extra innings losses in a row, which extends them to their current streak. They have failed to score the free runner from second base in 10 of their last 11 extra innings.
Is that bad?
That is, it's not good.
Okay.
I don't know if I want to say bad.
No, it's pretty darn hard. It seems like.
Yeah, you have 61% odds of scoring that runner under normal circumstances. So the fact that they've gone 1 out of 11, at a certain point you go from bad into like negative times a negative becomes a positive, and I mean maybe it's a new level of competitive disadvantage that they're trying to psych out the opponents and sandbag them until the next time they get to the extras. I don't know.
For a team that, by the way, promised to play small ball this year because they traded away most of their power in the last 2 off seasons. So, yeah, that's not a good sign, huh?
The Cubs took 2 of 3 against Cincinnati at home, and then the Boston Red Sox, as we mentioned at the top, came into town, and the Cubs took 2 of 3 against Boston. And I did want to get both of your thoughts on that Red Sox series. We got to see Adrian Sampson for the Cubs. We got to see Mark Leiter Jr. for the Cubs in relief, and Keegan Thompson as well. So let's talk about some of the positives for the weekend, and that is your Cubs pitching staff.
Yeah, I mean, it was facing a team that had been really hot, right? I mean, Boston had a tremendous June, right? I think they won 20 games or something, and managed to still lose a game in the standings to the Yankees. I mean, that's pretty incredible when you think about that division. So, I looked at that like, oh man, the Cubs are going to run into a buzzsaw. But like you said, they were playing competitive baseball. They had great pitching performances. They held down, and even in the game that they lost, right? I just mentioned the extra innings. They had multiple opportunities to win that. So they almost swept a very, very good team. And you start looking at it, it's enough to make you look back at the rest of the season and go, gosh, with just like one more player or a couple of timely hits here and there, you got this look at what maybe the Cubs could be. Unfortunately, that will probably be short-lived, but it was fun while it lasted.
Well, the last game lasted a long time. I was so fortunate that I got to catch that one on Sunday. It was felt like it was about 5.5 hours for an 11-inning contest. But I agree with Evan completely. It's the Cubs feel like they just couldn't quite get over the hump. They played some of their better baseball. They still make a lot of mistakes on the base paths, but played some of their better baseball of the season, and at least made these games entertaining, close, competitive. So I guess at this point, that's probably the best you can ask for, especially with the day of reckoning that is coming.
That's right. And this season, what is left of this season, is all about seeing.
It's almost halfway over.
It's almost halfway over.
Today is the halfway mark.
Unbelievable, and we will touch on where the Cubs are here at the halfway point. But the players, we'll speculate on who's not going to be here for the second half. But the players that will be here, it's trying to see, is this a guy, and is it someone who could be part of future Cubs plans or a bridge player to get to competitive teams again? And you gotta like when you see the development of guys like Keegan Thompson, and a guy who's had another great outing, that Mark Leiter Jr. coming in relief of the injured Alec Mills just after 7 pitches only. He pitched 5 1/3 innings, 3 hits, 1 run, 1 walk, and 5 Ks. That's it's these kind of guys that add the intrigue and give you the reason to watch down the stretch. Your thoughts on some of the performances and some of these guys that you're watching, Evan?
It's been so tough, I think, because as I'm watching the game here on Seiya Suzuki just hit a home run. So there we go. 2 home runs for Seiya Suzuki. Yeah. How great has that been to have him back? It just, although again, I can't mention that without saying yet again, here's a guy who gets hurt. The Cubs do not put him on the IL for like 4 games. They play a man down, and then they decide, oh yeah, it's pretty bad. And then he ends up missing a month. You guys could have just IL'd him right away and had another guy up. But, I think especially when we're talking about my goodness, he just hit a pitch that was like a foot inside out for a homer. That's incredible. But he's one of the few, right, who's already up in Chicago that you could look at and reasonably say, yep, that dude will still be here in 2 years. I've kind of gone through a process similar to what happened last July, where I've sort of emotionally removed myself from a few of these players and just said okay, I think this guy's gone, this guy's gone, this guy's gone. And so now it's okay, I'm going to invest in Suzuki and Horner. Horner's looked great, and for some reason I continue to overlook him. But that dude, all he's done, right? He got brought up way too fast because of injuries, and they kind of kept him up and never really sent him back down. And a lot of it was these injuries and everything. And I'm shocked personally that he's been able, but it's a testament to how much preparation he's done and what a good athlete and baseball player he is. He's just a joy to watch. I mean, he's great at shortstop. He's improved tremendously there. He's an excellent hitter. Super athletic. I really like watching him play. And it's been really cool to see Nelson Velasquez and Christopher Morel come up, provide a little bit of pop and a little bit of spark. And again, right now I'm just looking at it saying, okay, as we watch these games, who can we look at who is going to be someone who will actually be here next year and maybe in another year that they can sort of build around and get those pieces in place. So those are guys who are impressive to me. And then I've made no secret of my joy in watching Scott Efros pitch outside of the home run he gave up the other day, which probably shouldn't have been in position to have to give up that homer, but that's been really cool. And so kind of having a homegrown pitcher in the bullpen has been nice, in addition to the guys who are in the rotation, but they get enough publicity, so I don't need to mention them right now.
Yeah, Pat, I mean, the Cubs playing the Brewers this week, and yes, what a return for Seiya Suzuki. I could watch him hit an inside the park home run off of Josh Hader all the time.
That was enjoyable, for sure. It is nice to have him back. We talked last week, Jared and I did, about how we were getting a little bit concerned because it felt like the recovery was really kind of dragging. And I don't know, the extent of the injury, but that's a piece that the Cubs really do need to be able to evaluate over the course of hopefully the next, half of the season, because he really has only played for 1 month in all, his major league career. Cubs need to know what they're getting there, or at least have some understanding of that. To Evan's point on Nico Hoerner, I went into the season thinking Nico Hoerner would be maybe an adequate to below adequate shortstop, but an excellent second baseman. And I've been proven so far, halfway through a season, I've been proven wrong. He's been a great shortstop, so much so that when the Cubs look at figuring out what players they might be interested in obtaining on the free agent market, whereas at one point we thought for sure it had to be a shortstop, I'm not so sure they don't go out and get a shortstop and put the shortstop at second base and leave Nico Hoerner at short. Maybe Bogaerts could play second or someone like that. So it's been a real awakening for him, I think, offensively and defensively, and it's really great to see. And the Cubs need a couple guys to step up. And, is for as rough a season as Nick Madrigal's had, Nico Hoerner's sort of the opposite of that. So something to cheer for, and a guy who's going to be here in 3 weeks too, which is even more important, probably.
Yeah, definitely. And David Bodie at second base tonight in the Cubs lineup. So Christopher Morel not in the lineup tonight.
Do you think he's going to Wally Pip Christopher Morel? Like he'll be in the lineup today, and then he'll never give it up again. No,
I'll take the under. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, hard under.
Yeah.
Although, here's speaking of all this. So Bodie comes back from shoulder surgery. He runs into Nico Hoerner on a play, bangs up that same shoulder, and he's playing. And they said on the broadcast today that he said the shoulder feels as sore now as when he dislocated it last June.
Oh gosh.
I'm thinking, why is he playing? And why is he sharing that information in a manner that then Taylor McGregor can share it on Marquee? Because he just seems, and again, maybe it's just a bruise, but when most of your value is predicated around your ability to swing a bat, and you've got a sore shoulder that had been surgically repaired that kept you out of action until a couple of weeks ago, like if it's sore, why are you playing? This team and dudes playing hurt is just, there is a narrative there that I'm never going to let die because they continue to revive it. It is wild to me.
Yeah. Oof. And also we've got let's talk about that. You mentioned Bogaerts there, Pat, and one of the big pieces of news coming out this week was the article that I read on the Odyssey about Carlos Correa talking about not choosing the Cubs because he did not want to go there. The Cubs were in a rebuilding phase, and he wanted to go to winning teams, and he's only been on winning teams and had winning seasons. So a rebuilding phase is something isn't something I want to be a part of. That was what Carlos Correa said about coming to the Cubs. So the article went on to speculate that that Bogaerts from Boston would be an adequate target for the shortstop need that the Cubs had. I don't think Bogarts can play shortstop for very much longer. Maybe second base is and Nico Horner's your shortstop, like you mentioned there, Pat. But pretty disheartening if the Cubs were planning on trying to get some big free agents to come here, and you're going to have to convince some that the rebuild is not more than a few years away. I don't know.
We've been through this before. As you may recall, back in 2014, Cubs tried desperately to get Tanaka, and he ended up going to the Yankees. Of course, Cubs ended up winning World Series sooner than the Yankees because the Yankees have never won one since then. But for that 2014 season, remember how frustrated we were that the Cubs couldn't acquire him, and then I think the big or before the 2014 season, and then the big move for the Cubs that really kind of solidified their place was when they were able to pull Lester in December of 2014 after the Cubs were better in 2014 than this team is going to be this year.
Yep.
This team's Cubs are more like the 2013 Cubs, the really awful team. So you're basically going to be in the same boat you were going into the 2014 season, which is trying to convince somebody that a 100-loss team deserves, your talents as a player, and that's a tricky proposition. I don't know if the Cubs are A, going to have the motivation to do it, and B, if they do, is it going to cost them extra? And they don't like to pay extra, so I don't know how realistic it is that they're able to acquire a lot of talent this offseason, but who knows? We'll see. They have a real sell job to do to somebody. How about that?
Yeah, Evan, this is it feels like 2013 trying to sign those 2014 free agents.
Yeah, and I mean, you heard, the comments from Carlos Correa, like, I didn't want to do no rebuild, and Bogarts was a bit more diplomatic, but at the same time, right, he's coming from a Boston organization that they've had some down years, but they've turned it around very, very quickly, and that's the frustrating thing. I think we've seen both Boston and the Yankees multiple times, over these last few years. They'll have a down year, they'll retool, and they're immediately back after it, right? We're talking about two teams right now that are atop their division or close to it. And like I just said, winning 20-plus games in a month and picking things up and spending money and bringing guys up through the system, doing all the things the Cubs were supposed to do, right? But, I think the difficult part is when you look at these guys saying, we could all say, hey, if they threw enough money at them, they're not going to care whether it's a rebuild or not. They would come to the Cubs. But when we hear both Jed Hoyer and Crane Kenny within a week of one another saying, the money will be there when the time is right, and Kenny wonderfully admitting that money will roll over from the payroll this year, right? Which is a novel concept, because I didn't realize it was just a pile of money that they had, right? That they actually keep.
You thought they used a budget?
Yeah, it's very odd. That was my assumption, was that there was an amount they were willing to spend, and that shouldn't. You can't roll that over because it's not real money. But anyway, I digress. But the point is, if they're saying it's going to be there when the time is right, and yet, as we anticipate, and I'm sure we'll probably get into it a little bit more, several players from this current not good team, the best players from this current not good team being moved, there is no way in hell that you can replace those players plus add the requisite players to make this a good team next year. It can't happen. I don't believe that next year is when the time will be right. And so I don't think either Correa or Bogarts are coming, because it simply doesn't make any sense either for those players or for the Cubs to spend that money. So I think this is all a very calculated effort. The Cubs, just like last year, last offseason, they're going to be in the market for a top shortstop. And then, as we heard from Correa, there never really were any conversations. I think it's all something to keep people engaged, to make it seem like the Cubs are interested, that maybe they'll try to go for it. And then what'll happen is they'll talk about how the time wasn't right and try to keep as many of those season ticket holders engaged as they can for next year.
I will say this, that if we go through another offseason, having traded away, say, the top three players on the team, and then the Cubs go ahead and acquire two good players, and everybody says, oh, they did spend money. See, you're not telling the truth. They did spend money. You said they're not spending enough money. I think I might have to go off social media for a couple months because I just can't. I just can't keep doing this. I can't keep this. For whatever reason, the sort of the logical gaps that people have in their minds when you started off season down 6 players and say, oh well, we'll get 2 or 3, and therefore we can say we did spend money when in reality you're worse off than you were when you started, and that's where it happened this year, and I certainly hope it doesn't happen next year, but we seem to be on kind of a collision course for that, so who knows.
Oh, so we've got let's stay there for a minute. Let's plan ahead now. This is a late trade deadline. So the trade deadline is until August, actually.
August 2nd, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, August 2nd.
So
was that your idea, Jeremy, just to make us suffer longer?
That's it gives you a couple more opportunities to see your favorites at Wrigley Field. But this is going into this month of July here. You've got to be thinking a lot of teams are going to try to set the market more so than wait for it to come to them. With a lot of these teams that are bad, there's so many bad teams that have good players available. If we look ahead, who's the first Cub to go of significance? Is it Wilson Contreras? Is it Dave Robertson? Who's the first Cub to get traded and set the tone for this trade deadline?
Our 90-year-old closer, hopefully. I don't know. That'd be my guess. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Robertson is that deal feels a lot easier, right? There's no ties, long-term ties to Chicago, or at least not to the Cubs, right? He was with the White Sox like 25 years ago or something. But yeah, it feels like that's an easy one. Teams always need relievers, and the Cubs aren't going to be able to get a huge haul back for him. So I figure that's one that they can move on pretty easily. I think some of the others, when you talk about moving those guys, I think the Cubs are probably going to be looking for a bit more of a premium because they're going to need to in order to justify those moves, given the players I think are probably going to be playing elsewhere in the second half.
So is Wilson Contreras gone from the Cubs, and can they get a haul back? Do you feel, though, speculating, will they get a haul back that you could be satisfied with, or just not having Wilson on the team and what that does, the hole that it creates, will you just be chasing to try to fill that hole for a couple of years to come, long before any of those prospects are ready? Do you think the Cubs can actually be in a position to pull off a deal that you'd be satisfied with, Evan?
I mean, I would have said no. You know, I said the same thing about the 3 big guys they traded last year, and you know, it's one of those deals where I think you can be upset about the trade and still be happy with. Let me say this: upset about the fact that they were traded,
sure,
and then happy about the return, because I mean, geez, you're looking at somebody like Pete Crow Armstrong. And then you're looking at what Javi Baez is doing this year, and you're going like, well, okay, I kind of feel a little bit better about this. You know, but again, you're also talking about a 20-year-old playing an A-ball. So that's not an everyday center fielder yet, although maybe he could be, right? So back to the Wilson Contreras thing, I think, you know, I would have thought, and I've said this on the record many times, I felt like he was probably going to be the first of the group to be traded, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, just because of the extra control. And, you know, he had kind of had some injury issues. And of course, as we say this, he's got a little hammy thing going on right now. And that's happened a couple times before. But I don't know what kind of value you really get. And I don't know how the market judges that, because one of the things I've kind of written about and speculated is that, you know, the Cubs are using him lately. It feels like almost half the time at DH. And so his defensive prowess is not his carrying tool by any stretch. So at this point, have you almost worked yourself out of a big deal because teams are going to look at it and say, yeah, but he's not an everyday catcher. This guy's a regular catcher, but at this point, a lot of his offensive value comes from being the DH. And that's not as valuable as an everyday catcher. I don't know. I think that given the short time frame, he'll be able to command a little bit in return. But I just think for his value to this team, for what he would mean to them being able to move forward and having that spot lockdown, I am really struggling to believe that they can land the type of return that myself, or more importantly, the fans that are going to be out there buying even more tickets, are going to really be able to come to terms with after everybody else has been sent away too.
I would say I see the point. I thought that maybe the using Contreras at DH idea would be so that they didn't put too many innings on him, so he'd be more attractive to teams, go hit it that way, from a mileage standpoint this season, because we know how he's worn down at times in the past, and he's now gone half the year where he's got fresh legs, so to speak. But every time you have a catcher who you don't play a catcher, it does raise the question, well, why isn't he a catcher? And you start thinking about it, focuses you on the defense, which you might not otherwise be focused on. I got to say too, the play of PJ Higgins has helped, and which has been a pleasant surprise. And wanting to get Gomes some at bats. I mean, they have an excuse for why they've done it.
And the Cubs, it's an unwritten rule for the Cubs that a catcher has to be the DH at all times. That's
right. Yeah, I mean, we watched Victor Caratini DH with an OPS of about 650 for an entire season. So yeah, in any event, it'll be interesting to see what they can get back for him, because they are going to trade him, and unless they get something of significance, people are going to be ticked off, because I think a lot of people see this as sort of the last piece, pretty much, of the old team, and people have grown. I think people have grown to like Contreras over the 14 years he's been in the organization. He's a Jim Henry guy, for crying out loud. So, he's sort of the senior statesman.
It's not just the last piece, but he's a piece that you would need if you're going to be competitive 3 years from now. You need a Wilson Contreras on this roster, especially for his mentorship and leadership, and the way he's the emotional, if not captain of the team right now.
Well, they can just extend Jason Hayward for that role.
True.
Come on.
True. That's fair.
But on the Contreras, I also think the timing it's interesting, because we talked about prospects coming up, and somebody who, interestingly enough, like the guys who would have ranked 1, 2, 3 for the Cubs, maybe, late last season, all are hurt. But one of them, Miguel Amaya, right, one of their top prospects for the last several years, is a catcher and is just now coming back and DHing in the Arizona Complex League after having elbow reconstruction. So, you wonder, as I talked about prospects coming up, is that he's supposed to have been the heir apparent for a while, and they say, well, hey, Yan Gomes for another year, and PJ Higgins has been doing well, and they can carry us through maybe next year when we wouldn't have had Contreras. His contract is up. We can get something in return for him. We're not really trying to go for it next year anyway, and then we hope Miguel Amaya will be ready in 24, and that's when we can go. So I wonder how much of that factors into their thought process there as well.
I really hope they're not relying on that as their plan. I mean,
well, I certainly hope not.
I mean, I like the guy. I like the guy enough. I've never seen him actually play in person, but when you've got a guy in your organization who was, I think, a top 3 prospect 3 years ago, and who hasn't really taken an at bat, and even in a minor league game, it makes you a little nervous, I think, given the situation. I mean, we had the COVID situation and the injuries. Amaya seems to be one of those guys who's kind of caught up in this bad kind of string of circumstances, many of which were beyond his control. But boy, if you get rid of Contreras, you have to be willing to get another catcher at some point. And I don't want to hear people complaining about, it's expensive to get a free agent catcher. Yeah, well, it is. So, careful what you ask for.
Well, we've got quite a few Cubs that are on that list of potential trade targets. the entire bullpen, like you mentioned, and a lot of position players are available. Pat, I heard you and Jared talking about the Patrick Wisdom situation and the conundrum that they're in there. I wanted to get Evan's take on Patrick Wisdom, and is he a bridge player that stays with the Cubs, or is he someone you're willing to hear a trade offer for, as a contending team might want that power in their lineup? Is that where does Wisdom fit for you? Is he someone you see being traded away, or staying on as that bridge player?
I figured he was more of a backgammon guy than bridge, but I don't really know. Maybe rook, but no. I think it's one of those where, again, they're looking at it and saying, and he does actually pick it pretty well at third base. So I don't want to say he's like a one-tool kind of a guy, but when you look around at again, some of the prospects that they may be having come up, you look at kind of his age and how do you think that's going to factor? How well will that weigh? I think he's a guy who they may not necessarily be actively looking at him as someone who's going to bring back a big piece, but I do think it's one of those where he'll most certainly be made available. And if a team comes to them with an offer that they feel is going to be worthwhile, because we keep looking at this, you keep saying, well, we're not necessarily talking about what Wisdom can do this year or even next year, but what's this guy going to be doing in 2024? Do you still believe that in 24 and 25, this is a guy you're going to have manning third base for you? And, personally, I would say the answer is probably no. And so if a team comes to him, it's like, hey, we'll flip this, a team that really needs power. And we saw that, and he's certainly putting up better numbers than what Jock Peterson did for the Cubs. But again, Peterson brought back Bryce Ball, who's had a really solid season. If it's something like that, right, where the Cubs see they've got an organizational need and can get it, I would have to imagine Wisdom's gone. Because if they're willing to part with franchise cornerstones, as we've clearly seen they have been, and certainly they'll show us again that they will be, I see no reason why they wouldn't move on from me, even if it's as a sweetener. Like if you, he's certainly, I think, a better contributor than Trevor Williams was last year, but they had to kick in Trevor Williams along with Javi Baez to get Pete Crow Armstrong. I could absolutely see Wisdom being that guy that if a team is looking for, whether it's Contreras or Happ or maybe Hendricks or, again, Robertson, I don't know. Hey, we'll throw in Wisdom if you bump up to your number 2 prospect or whatever it is, right? I could most definitely see that being the case.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a bridge player, in my opinion. Not when you're in the position the Cubs are in right now and taking the course they're taking. If there was such a thing as a bridge player, then why isn't Anthony Rizzo playing first base? He could have. They're putting away. You could have re-signed him in the offseason if you really wanted to. They don't want bridge players. They want to basically tear it down to the studs and trade everybody who they can get something for. And if you can't really get much back for Wisdom, I guess it probably doesn't make sense to trade him in the grand scheme of things. But if they can get any kind of a prospect similar to some of the guys they got back last trading deadline, or as Evan points out, if in combination with someone else you can get something better, I think they'll take the plunge if they need to. And I mean, Wisdom's an attractive player to teams on a couple fronts because he's cheap. He's got team control, which are two things that people like. He also has a lot of power. The question the Cubs have to ask is he also sort of, and other teams as well, is this peak Patrick Wisdom? I mean, the problem is he got really good when he was 30 and 31. So, is it just downhill from here? And if so, then you have to just ask yourself, he's not going to be here and when you're good, unless the Cubs are planning on doing something miraculous in the offseason we're unfamiliar with. So you might as well, get what you can.
So you're telling me the second half is going to be, or the last 2 months of the season, August and September, will be pretty painful to watch.
I mean, if you're dumb enough to watch, yeah.
We do a podcast every week. Yeah, we got to.
So we'll watch so you don't have to, I suppose, is sort of the approach I think we have to take. But yeah, no, it's going to be painful again. Remember last season, it was bad. I mean, there were stretches, even with the success of Wisdom and Frank Schwindel and others. It was rough because what happens in the second half, when you get a couple more pitching injuries and a couple guys, who had been good position players are no longer on the team, you get really depleted and you start losing more games. That's sort of how that works, I think. Will it be interesting to watch Scott Effers hopefully as the closer? Sure, but I wouldn't expect perfect results either. You sacrifice some things in the effort to see who can do what. Right? You'll have a lot of rookies. They'll be making a lot of mistakes, but hopefully some of them will sort of separate themselves from the crowd. It'd be great if Christopher Morel can have a great second half and assert himself as sort of a super utility player, whatever you want to call it, a la Ben Zobrist, et cetera. I mean, that would be wonderful. But you don't know. That's why there are things to be learned from the second half. It's just that I think most fans are going to recoil at the actual final scores from all the games because they'll be bad.
Will they be worse than Cincinnati bad?
Are they worse now? I don't know.
They are not. Currently, they are 32 and 48 as of the time of this recording at the midway point of the season.
Give Cincinnati some credit. I mean, they're still going to probably trade Castillo, and so they'll lose their best pitcher, and they'll probably. I don't know if they're going to get rid of Votto, but they'll try to make their team worse as well. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, we talked about it a couple weeks ago that the race to the bottom is extremely competitive right now.
Almost impossible to get to, by the way. It's like the bottom of the ocean. You can, no matter how far you go, it seems to keep going.
The Cubs are just swimming down toward the Laurentian abyss at this point. Yes. They're going to try to get to the bottom.
First reference ever in 9 years of podcasting to that. Thanks very much.
You've got.
Don't tell me that Transformers didn't ever teach anybody anything, because that's where I know about that, because that's where they sent Megatron. But the Constructicons got him back, so maybe the Cubs can figure it out. I don't know.
The Cubs currently have a better record than Cincinnati, than the Washington Nationals, and and that's it in the National League. So
is that what Tom Ricketts said when he said he wanted to be competitive this year?
He didn't say in which direction.
No, he did not.
Fair enough. Tricked us all.
Both Detroit and Kansas City in the American League are worse than the Cubs, and of course the Oakland A's. Everyone else better record than the Chicago Cubs at the midway point.
Yeah. So we're fifth worst. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Without saying it.
And all those teams are going to try to get appreciably worse at the same, which is really, I'll go ahead and when we eventually come back on our own predictions for this show, my idiocy will be on full display. But I also pegged the Tigers to be like a surprise team in the AL Central. I thought they were going to be really good. They made some great signings and moves, I thought. But, I'd be shocked if they don't try to trade Tucker Barnhart after they got him from the Reds, right? Everybody got players from the Reds and then got worse, like the Cubs with Wade Miley, and the Tigers with Barnhart are going to end up just flipping them over again. And just like, man, the Reds, if you just would have held on to these guys, you probably could have traded them for more. But
it's like they're poison or something. Well, as long as we're going to talk about predictions, I want to throw one out right now that I made because it may not hold. So while it's still there, if you roll back the tape, Jeremy, from our prediction show at the beginning of the year, I did make a comment about how the Pirates might be better than the Cubs. I know, scandalous, right? And yet here we are halfway through the season, and the Pirates are just a little bit better than the Cubs. So that may not hold, but you look at a team like the Pirates, and you do see some young players coming up and playing well. Now they don't have the resources the Cubs do to fill around that, obviously, but that's what I think fans really want to see from the Cubs is they want to see young players coming up and giving them some reason for optimism, right? And last year was fun, but were we really optimistic to have 30-year-olds playing well? I mean, I think you really want to have guys in their mid-20s playing well in order to feel that the future is brighter.
Yeah, it's we hope to see, a lot of the guys we hope to see in the last couple of months are out injured. We won't see them. So we're gonna get some of the deep cuts, the B-sides, coming up here and filling out the rest of the season post the trade deadline. It will be it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a tough watch down the road. So let's look ahead to the week that will be for the Cubs.
I bet they split the first two in Milwaukee. I don't know what they're going to do in the third
So
game.
we already talked about their loss in extra innings to the Brewers already. They have a lead at the time of this recording here against the Brewers. So one more against Milwaukee, and then off to Los Angeles for the Dodgers. And let's see. Do you have the pitching matchups there, Pat? For
Yeah,
who's
wonderfully I do. The Cubs have no starter for the first game, which is probably for the better. In game 2, Thompson, Steele 3, Hendricks 4, and they're going up against Gonsolin, Anderson, Kershaw, Urias. So some pretty good pitchers. Bueller's hurt, so you catch a break there, but just looking at those pitchers, you gotta feel like the Cubs are probably gonna try to do what? Win 1 out of 4? Either Thompson or Steele will probably pitch well, and Cubs sneak one out.
Yeah, I exactly Thompson or Steele. Yeah, I think they can get one. Getaway day against the Brewers.
Rumor has they're going to make Mills pitch left-handed in the first game, so we'll see if anyone notices.
Evan, are we pessimistic, or can the Cubs win more than one in Los Angeles here?
Given that Los Angeles was the site of their last true hurrah as a team.
Yeah, the no-hitter.
Yeah. I mean, it is like you look at how bad they've been since that. Like that was the very obvious high point of the year for multiple reasons, and then everything since then has just been pretty hot trash.
For a year,
yeah.
For over a year.
Yeah, I think they can probably fall bass backwards into a win somewhere again with one of those younger pitchers maybe leading the way. And but man, that Dodgers lineup you rolled off the pitchers, and even with Bueller hurt, they're still so good. And then that lineup, it's just you look up and down, you're like, how do you get through that? But hey, every once in a while, Thompson and Steele have both looked really good. I do think the troublesome part with that though is, does Ross manage them well enough and pull them before they get that? To me, that's the key. Does he pull them before they get to that point where everybody's going, dude, you needed to pull them like an out earlier or an inning earlier. So, if they manage it well and the bullpen hangs together, they'll get a win.
Speaking of the Dodgers and how great their record is, they're on pace for 100 wins. Can I ask the two of you a question? Can you remember a time when the league had probably 5 teams that are going to win over 100 games, as well as probably 5 teams that are going to lose 100 games? It seems like, for all the talk of competitive balance, et cetera, that so far it's been an abject failure.
I remember losing 100 games was like a big deal. Like that got a lot of coverage.
Really bad.
Yeah,
you were mocked and made fun of.
Yeah, now it's there's 5 teams that could lose 100 games. That's insane.
Yeah, and I love the idea that a draft lottery was supposed to be part of what would curb the idea of tanking. It's like, no, if 3 teams now have a chance at the best pick, or the best chances at the top pick, you're not just competing for one spot at the top. It's like the wild card trying to get people to be more competitive, right? The whole point is that more people get in on it. So if the Cubs can trade everybody away and get one of the worst 3, they don't have to be the worst. They can be 3rd worst and still have the same odds at the number 1 pick, right? So, like, where is that to discourage? I think what we've seen, and it certainly has become this way in the NBA. I don't think the NFL is quite there, but there's no teams don't see any value in being in the middle, particularly now with expanded playoffs, right? If you're not going to be one of those teams that's competing, you may as well be as bad as possible, at least for a year. The Cubs can only be in the lottery for 1 year since they pay into the competitive balance, right? But man, it is a weird season There's some very, very
The
good
only
teams and
thing,
very bad ones.
the only thing keeping this year from having 7 teams finish with 100 losses is that the Pirates, Cubs, and Reds are in the same division, and also the Tigers and Royals are. So it's mathematically less likely because they play each other so much. But boy, 7 teams are 100 loss bad at this point, roughly, more or less 100 loss bad at this point.
Remember 7 years ago when the Cubs and Pirates had 2 of the 3 best records in the National League?
Yeah, they were like 97 wins for the Cubs and
the Cardinals
89 wins. Yeah,
all 3 of them had 97 plus wins, right? I mean, and now here we are 7 years later. Now I know that's a long time, but now you've got 2 of those. One of those teams has only had 1 losing record in the last 19 years or so, and the other 2 are trying to get to 100 losses. So,
I feel like the success
of the Cardinals, but still,
the success of the Cubs and the Astros with tanking and then winning, albeit short-lived, and many other teams have tried to get bad to get better draft picks and not succeed. You only remember the ones that do well, right? But the Orioles have been trying it for like 20 years now, and the Marlins have tried it for quite a while too. But the fact that those 2 teams did so well after intentionally tanking, I think in retrospect might be one of the worst things for baseball as a sport, because it's really led to this weird, perverse incentive to lose on purpose. And that's not really good for the fans. I mean, there was a time when you knew your team wasn't good, you knew you'd trade players at the deadline, et cetera. But it feels now like teams are almost, not only do they not care about winning, but they kind of go into entire seasons or stretches of seasons with the thought that, yeah, we're going to be bad. And that's the plan. And we're going to trade anybody who might make us better and try to get whatever we can for them. And just the way that it's done so dramatically now, and so it's so absolutist in the approach, I think is really bad for baseball as a sport. It's bad for the fans.
Couldn't agree more. It's tough, and but you're right. People only remember the successes. They don't.
Yeah, and so Cubs fans will be listening to this and saying, "Well, I don't think it's so bad. We won a World Series. What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Yeah, but if you can look outside yourself at the other 15 or 20 teams that have been trying this since we did, unsuccessfully, what you get is you get lopsided bad baseball. You get fan bases that become disengaged. You get owners who, just coincidentally get to save money for a bunch of years by not trying to win and signing players." And I just think it sets up a bad overall system. And then it falsely creates a bunch of 100-win teams too, because the talent gets concentrated in those areas instead of spread out among players in the league.
By the teams that want to win, yes.
Yeah, and let's not forget that the Cubs and Astros both, it wasn't as if they just drafted a bunch of guys at the top and that was the only. I mean, you mentioned John Lester earlier, and for as much as Jason Hayward gets a lot of flack at this point, they still spent $184 million on him. So, I mean, you had $330 million ish in 2 top end free agents who were, and let's not forget at the time, Jason Hayward was far and away the most coveted free agent position player of that class. So the Cubs went out and made huge splashes in free agency to add the fact that every one of those top picks hit very quickly. And even then the guys they traded, and you look at Jake Arrieta, and then you had like half of Cleveland's starting rotation get hurt ahead of the World Series. Like, there was a lot that had to break exactly the right way and then have a whole lot of luck bear its way out with them as well. So it's like people look at this and think it's just some magic formula. Like, oh, suck for a couple years, draft high, develop prospects, win World Series. No, there's like a million other factors that all have to go in your favor for that to work out. And I hate it so much that that's become kind of this acceptable means of building a team.
Right.
It's like the de facto way to build a team. I mean, and it's especially shameful for large market teams to do that when they charge a lot of money for their games already. And they have a lot of money to kind of take that path, I think.
Right. You can look at the Angels have 2 of the best players, the 2 best players in baseball, if you will. And
stars and scrubs.
And and they're not competitive. And you have teams like Baltimore who can't sign free agents, who solely rely on their draft position, and they're always bad. And so it's not a recipe for success. It is you have to get lucky, and the timing has to work, and you have to have those surprises that emerge, and it all has to go right.
Well, Jake Arrieta for you, right?
Yeah, unless you're the Dodgers, who actually have say, "Hey, we're a large market team, and we're going to spend beyond the luxury tax, and we are going to have star players. We're going to get other people's star players that they don't want to pay for, like Mookie Betts, and we're going to have a pipeline of talent. And when they come up, we will have a spot. We will make a spot, and if we don't, we move them for other players that help us win now. It's whatever the Dodgers do. Why is that not the model for the Cubs?
Well, it requires spending a lot of money.
There it is. There it is. Okay.
You don't hear. Tell me the next time you hear a Dodgers executive talk about rolling over unused money from the payroll to next year, right? Like that's the other part, I guess. And Pat, as you had mentioned, right, that they're coming out and they're talking about all these things, but to transparently come out and say that effectively that part of this is about money. Like we're saving money by not having a very good team, right there. But hey, we'll take that save. We'll use it, next year or 2 years from now. Like no, you won't. Money it's not like that money gets set aside and put somewhere. So the fans are paying more for a bad product while ownership is reaping the rewards from it and not having to pay for that competitive team. I don't know where that inflection point is at where it hurts ownership enough because of clearly season ticket holders are falling off and attendance isn't as good, but at what point does it become such that ownership says, oh shoot, we're not making as much money. If we spent more money on the payroll, we'd actually recoup all of it and more in gate revenues and other sales and attendance and all this stuff. So attendance at the hotel and the bars and all those things. I don't know where that is, but I don't think it's coming before 2024.
Yeah, I think it's a philosophy, though. Like, as you point out, the money's there. So let's assume even that the Cubs were like, look, we don't want to pay the luxury tax. Like, it's just not something we're up for as a team. Dodgers don't mind doing it. Yankees don't mind doing it. Red Sox will do it if they have to. But say the Cubs are like, no, we're just not going to do that for whatever reason. You still want to spend on an annual basis up to the luxury tax, right? You want to get as close as you can. And if that means, like, we're not going to compete this season, but we'll buy Eric Hosmer and every other bad contract or, some awful one-year contracts off of teams in exchange for also giving us a prospect, so be it. You do that, right? But you utilize that money. You make sure that you're spending all of that money to make your team as good as you possibly can, if not for this year, then for the future years. You don't just pocket the money and say, well, sorry, couldn't get anybody. You have to be more creative than that. And, you really should have the expectation that you're going to spend that money every year because they can afford to, and they should.
Taking bad contracts. Yeah, taking bad contracts for prospects has been a hockey plan to rebuild for a lot of teams. That makes a ton of sense. And yeah, they don't. It doesn't feel creative what they're doing. It feels like they're one of a pack of 5 or 6 or 10 teams doing. In that regard,
is it weird that the Blackhawks got a former Cubs front office member to be a part of their front office?
They did.
Seems a little antithetical at that point, but yeah, there are so many other things. Like, I think a lot of people would be able to. Some people wouldn't really get it, but a lot of people would have been able to stomach so much more. Like if they had gone and gotten Kevin Kiermaier from the Rays or Hosmer or Will Myers or anyone, like spend that money if you said it was there. Like, which again, I continue to go back to this. It's just the dumbest concept I've ever heard that Crane Kenny espoused, that money is there and it rolls over to the next one. That's not how budgets work.
No.
But if the money really was there, then why did you not go do something? And I'm not even talking about necessarily making a team better, like appreciably better this year. Does Eric Hosmer turn them into a contender? No. But it would bring back another piece that in the future, if you're still, as they've pointed out very clearly, they're not intent on competing this year and probably won't be for at least another year. then why not set yourself up better for the future and spend some of that money if you were willing to, if it was truly budgeted. If there was more money in the budget and they did not spend it to either A, make the team better this year or set themselves up better next year, that just complete malpractice on the part of either the front office or the business operation, or that or somebody's lying one way or the other. But that's the part that I just can't wrap my head around. You said it was there. You said it was going to be there. Now you said it is there. And yet nothing was done with it. So
frustrations will only continue to mount as we roll into the All-Star game, followed by the trade deadline a couple weeks later. All things to look forward to. We'll have plenty of coverage of all this here on this podcast, and you can also follow along with all of the Cubs news and coverage at Evan Altman's website. Evan, why don't you remind our listeners where they can read all of your content on the internet?
Absolutely. Come check us out at Cubs Insider. If you prefer to get everything through Twitter, right? We're at Real Cubs Insider. You can search Cubs Insider on Facebook, YouTube. We're all over the place. So, have at it. And this very podcast will eventually show up on that very site.
So
you can
magic
listen to us and then read my stuff, most of which lately has not been all that sunny. So
sounds like a pretty fancy website if it's got our podcast on it.
It is. It's it's one of the more bougie Cubs websites that's out there.
Do you have to wear a jacket when you listen to that? Like at the fancy restaurants, or no?
I have stopped requiring it. However, like Chicago Cut, I will not allow you to wear a hat when you read the site.
Thanks.
So,
Thanks.
Yes.
And make sure, that you're following on Twitter with us as well, at Wrigleyville Nat, the same for Instagram, facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation. And our website, this show and the entire back catalog of this podcast is available there as well, WrigleyvilleNation.com. And we've got a TeePublic shop, a link right there for the store. You can buy yourself some merch. We appreciate all of the folks buying tank tops for the summer, buying T-shirts and mugs and all kinds of stuff over at the TeePublic shop. They're always running sales. Stuff's on sale all the time. So click the link on our website or pin to the top of our Twitter. That'll take you right to the website. You get yourself stuff on sale. Support the show that way. The other way you can support the show is via our Patreon, patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. Thank you again to all of our patrons who, through your generosity and support of this show, we're able to stay ad-free this is our 4th season now being ad-free, thanks solely to the support of our Patreon supporters. So you can go there and check that out. And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Pat, thanks for joining us.
Jeremy, can I give you just my 15-second moment of zen?
If you got one, I need one. Yeah.
Yep. So in a 60-year period, the Baltimore Orioles only lost over 100 games once. And then starting in 2018, they lost 115, 108. Then they had the COVID year, mercifully did not lose 100. And then last year, 110. So let's just not be the Orioles. How about that?
And now they're winning. They're winning the division now. That's the finally.
No, now they're in 5th.
Oh,
now they're still in 5th. Sorry, I forgot that part. Yeah, they're still in 5th.
Yeah, don't be the Orioles. Yeah. All right, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.